Welcome back. Today I am in Al Khobar in Saudi Arabia. I'm attending a conference called Sync. And it's my second time here. The first time I came was in 2022 in March. And I have to say, I marked it as one of my favorite conferences ever. So Sync basically is focused on digital well-being. It's an attempt to use the wealth and connections and success of Saudi Arabia to create a get-together for people to discuss what I tend to believe is one of the biggest challenges to our well-being today, the digital world, the advancement of the internet, and now artificial intelligence. And the Sync just has that very interesting vibe to it. It's an event that's sort of loosely organized. You know, it's not that tremendously formal, even though it's ticking like a clock. But most of it is just conversations on stage between different people with different opinions and points of view, aiming to make the world slightly more alert, more aware of the challenges that we have with digital well-being. So today I have several guests that the Sync team has kindly arranged for me to meet with. And the first of whom is a Bangladeshi American MIT graduate, PhD in technology, who is the US envoy of AI globally and who is the CEO of Humane Intelligence. Rumman Chowdhury is a voice of reason in the rise of artificial intelligence. We, from what I've seen from her work, agree on many things, don't agree on some things, but we agree that humanity needs to engage in a different way if we were to see the benefits of artificial intelligence. She brings wisdom, I think, to the conversations of technology, which are normally all about data and facts and possibilities. So I think you're going to really enjoy this conversation with my first guest at Sync, Rumman Chowdhury. Rumman, thank you so much. First of all, it's an honor to see you here in Saudi. We share a few things in common. So, like me, who is now much more focused on sort of helping the world become a tiny bit better, I did spend a lot of my time in the wheels of the corporate world. I know you worked at Accenture, you worked at Twitter as well.
That's right.
Yeah.
Right.
Tell me, to start, if you believe that the promise of the corporate technology players is being delivered, and why are you not part of the tech world and of the corporate tech world anymore?
First, thank you so much for having me on the show. I'm super enthusiastic to talk to your listeners, who I know span the globe, have a lot of different perspectives. So, your question is interesting. Like, are tech companies delivering on their promise? Well, Silicon Valley is such a fascinating place because really never in the history of capitalism have we had corporate entities so wholeheartedly embody or try to embody humanistic perspective. So they don't say, we're building a widget for you to use. They say, we are connecting people all around the world. They don't say, we're finding ways to find things on the internet. They'll say, we're revolutionizing access to information, right? We don't think of cars. Car companies don't say, we enable people to be connected all over, like they don't have such romantic visions. And I don't think it's disingenuous. I think a lot of these founders truly believe or want to embody this in the technology that they're building. It's part of the lifeblood of Silicon Valley as well. I do think, though, that realizing a humanistic vision is not going to be purely corporate driven. So the second part of your question was, well, why am I no longer in tech? I will say, I have tried to carve out a space of being integrated into technology, right? So I work with all of the major AI companies. I just came from the AI Safety Summit in Seoul, where I saw a lot of peers and colleagues at Microsoft and Google and Salesforce, et cetera. But I do think that any healthy ecosystem has a wide range of players.
I find that to be very accurate to my years at Google. So, because when I joined Google, honestly, I totally believed in the mission to organize the world's information. Oh my God, what a cause to give my life to. Mm-hmm. And I'll tell you openly, the first day, the first weeks I walked the corridors, that was very true. Like every single one of us was blinded by the mission. And then I remember vividly one of my favorite bosses at Google saying, I'm worried that we're going to become old and boring. It was the words he used, and basically the idea that you start to hire people that run the business like a business, and suddenly your vision, your mission, your ambition, your aspiration becomes secondary to your quarterly profits and the way things run, and then you find yourself
which plenty of people would say that's exactly what some of these companies are now. And I've heard this analogy about Google, that people say that Google is no longer the company they joined, that a lot of the specific one I've heard is there used to be the Fridays are for
TGIFs, yeah.
Right, like doing whatever you want, exploring something that's passionate to you, and that's just not the case for most
the
Googlers
20%
anymore.
time, the 20% time was cancelled
I'm
as well.
not sure whether it was formally removed, but it's one of those things like
It
at Twitter.
was formally
Was it
removed,
really?
yeah.
Or at Twitter we used to have no meeting Fridays, but let's be real, if you're a people manager, there's no such thing as a no meeting day, right?
Yeah.
So it's on the books, maybe for some people, but it's not the case for most. But I suppose I would counter that to say, is that such a bad thing? Corporations are being corporate.
Is it? I don't know. I mean, the thing is that they never really stop making the promise, right?
That's right. So it's that disconnect which can be a problem,
right?
And that can be the problem where, and I see this a lot in responsible and ethical AI, where people are initially they're disillusioned. People who become, let's say, whistleblowers, right, are not people who came in with an agenda, right? They're people who came in and truly believed the mission, but then the mission was out of sync with the reality of the situation.
Yeah.
And in every single case, they'll all say the same thing. They were true believers.
Yeah.
They were not cynics. They were true believers. And they came in and they saw something that was misaligned with the vision, right?
Yeah.
But when they tried to, let's say, raise it internally, they were blocked or they were stopped. And being a whistleblower, for the people who chose to do it, it was a last resort.
Yeah.
It was not their agenda going in, but it was only when the institution failed them because there was a misalignment of their expectations and reality, which is why I sort of, introduce a little controversial statement. Is it so bad? So what if we're like, okay, well, when you work at a corporation, you're doing corporate things. It's not necessarily a bad thing in a sense, right? Corporations should have a mind to the impact on society, but their goal isn't to resolve impact on society. Like their legal structure is to make profit for shareholders. That is what they are there for. So even if you're a B Corp, so if we're thinking about large language model companies, Anthropic is a B Corp, right? Does that mean Anthropic's going to stop chasing profit? No, it doesn't.
Of course not.
No.
Yeah. And I, as you rightly say, I agree 100% that there's nothing wrong with that. As long as you wake up every morning and say,
right.
yeah, we're here, we're going to focus on profits, right? That would be a way of really making a promise that you're going to keep. And I think the struggle really is, which is really my segue into why you do what you do, is I too believe that I could not make corporates prioritize impact from within the corporate world.
That's right. It's hard. I struggled with that a bit at Twitter. And here's where I think having a not overly idealistic view helps.
Yeah.
Right? If you go in and you understand, so I'm a social scientist by background. I look at institutions and incentive structures.
Yeah.
And maybe there's something a bit cold and calculating about that, but it helps me navigate institutions. If I understand that this is a corporate entity, at the end of every quarter, I was at Twitter, Jack Dorsey, they have to get in front of shareholders and say, this is how much money we made, this is how many users we have, right? Impact is a very nice story, but whatever you're doing with an impact you have to figure out a way to align with that. So there were things that my team at Twitter worked on that, I had a mind to, okay, I have to pitch this as something that will drive the metrics that matter.
Absolutely.
And sometimes I worry that people who go in with an overly idealistic view, right, they're overly romanticizing it, they are offended by having to do that.
Yeah. I mean, in the original Google, and by the way, I always make a public statement that from the outsider's view of the world we live in today, I still think that Google is reasonably ethical in the way they do things. They reasonably are driven by making a difference. I know personally,
it's hard to do what they do. It is it's very easy to be on the outside and point fingers.
Of course.
But once you are handed the responsibility of problem solving, you truly understand how difficult it is.
Yeah, and I will say openly that I still believe that Sundar or Demis or the leaders I tend to believe that they're truly, and I know them personally. I've worked with them sometimes in my career. I know the kinds of decisions they make. They are driven by making a difference, but of course, navigating the metrics, like you called it,
Right.
is very, very important. Which is, some of the more interesting, situations for me in the original Google, where most of us were like Demis, to be honest, right? Most of us were like Sundar, humble. I'm not that intelligent, but everyone was really super intelligent. They basically took care in the power that they were given. And the conversation of don't be evil was actually on the
That's right.
table all the time.
Yep.
I think then when the bureaucrats, as we used to call them lovingly, because you need bureaucrats
You
to run
do.
an $80 billion business,
right.
when the bureaucrats were confronted with the topic of don't be evil, they were like, let's define evil.
Right. There's a little asterisk.
Exactly.
And then there's the fine print. Evil
Exactly.
is defined as like overtly breaking the law, for
There
example.
you go.
And so we see this in responsible AI quite a bit, right? Where I have a lot of conversations about how responsible use is not compliance.
Correct.
Compliance is the floor.
Yeah.
That's the bare minimum. You are not breaking the law. It's not ethical and responsible. It's like, congratulations, you woke up and brushed your teeth, right? That's compliance.
Yeah.
Ethics goes above and beyond, because now you have to have a vision for the world you want to achieve. And you
Yeah.
are actively doing things to achieve that vision. And the hard part of being a leader of one of these companies is you're really balancing this quarter over quarter reporting need to a long-term vision. And something like fairness, responsible use, things like that build trust. Trust takes a long time to build. So one does not overnight or in one quarter or maybe even 1 year create a more ethical, responsible like technology stack.
Yeah.
But the current reporting cycle, pure shareholder analysis would say, what did you do this quarter? What did you do year over year? I don't care about 5 years from now.
Yeah. And I think that's really where it becomes, I second your point of view about ethics and, the bare compliance minimum. I write about that publicly, and I say being legal is not always ethical, right?
No, oh yeah, that's certainly true. The law has in many cases been very unethical, but also I worried, well, and the thing is, in order to be ethical, you have to have a perspective. And you have to have perspectives on things that are not necessarily 100% agreed on by everybody.
Correct.
And you have to have perspectives that could be controversial. And
Correct.
you have to be willing to stand by your moral framework, even if it is different from somebody else's moral framework. So today, in this sort of new generation of frontier AI models, we're almost seeing companies trying to not have a perspective and trying to technology their way out of it.
What do you mean by that?
So, for example, one of the common methods of training, quote, values-aligned AI systems is something called reinforcement learning with human feedback, RLHF. RLHF is basically getting Amazon workers to rate output, using that to create a model, and using that model to train another model. By doing that, nobody has to have an opinion. Right. And then you get to say, oh, I don't have an opinion about the Holocaust, or I don't have an opinion about, like something like gay marriage. Right. We are reflecting the opinions and values of, quote, people. But there's a couple of things wrong with that. Number one is there's no such thing as universal values. There isn't.
Correct.
Even if you think of something that we should all possibly think that we agree on. For example, people shouldn't murder other people. Well, I live in the United States where the death penalty is still on the books in many states. Don't we murder people in the United States?
Yeah.
We have very lax gun policies. Don't we allow people to murder people? So even if we say something that we would think that everybody universally agrees on, right? Human beings should not kill other human beings. We already see gray area within that. So trying to achieve universal values is an impossibility. The second is the construct of the way this feedback works, right? Again, I'm a social scientist. What people say their values are is sometimes discordant with their actions.
Yeah.
Right. So people will say they want better schools and better roads, et cetera, but they will also say, why did you raise my taxes? Right. So I want to pay less money to the government. Government's evil and corrupt, but also schools need to be better.
Yeah.
That's incongruous, but they don't see it. Like we, as human beings, we're immensely capable of holding completely discordant thoughts. It's one of the most amazing things about human beings.
So I wanna build the story for our listeners here. So we've established we cannot rely on corporates to create an ethical framework for us because they will comply within legal frameworks.
I guess I'd say they're part of the ecosystem. They're not solely going to do it.
Yeah, so they'll comply with a legal framework, but legal is not always ethical, and we cannot rely on governance or society to tell us what is right and what is wrong. I mean, not society maybe is the wrong word, but we can't let governance tell us what is ethical because we don't really agree to what is ethical. Governance in the U.S., as you rightly said, says yeah, you have the right to hold a gun, when it seems to me like a step away from murdering others, right? So the story we have here, and just to bring context to our listeners, is that over the years, as the internet started to shape our behaviors, our characters, our beliefs, our moralities in many ways, we're now about to hit this second wave of the internet on steroids, if you want, like, artificial intelligence truly magnifying what humanity is. And when you talk about things like reinforcement learning, that idea of asking employees of OpenAI to tell us what their views of things is, this is not reflective at all of the rest of the world. It lacks understanding of different cultures, different languages, different value systems, different traditions. And, the joke I always give, with all due respect to all opinions, is that if if an OpenAI employee says a man killed a woman in Pakistan, the typical reinforcement learning of California would be, don't call them men and women. This is a gender identity issue, right? And in reality, and that's true. We're Californicating artificial intelligence. Now, that to me is probably one of the top societal dilemmas that the world is about to face. And I heard you once say something that I really took to heart, which is where you said AI is, I'm paraphrasing here, but you basically said AI is not our innovation, it's our mirror. It's basically reflecting to us what humanity is. What does that mean?
That's right. So artificial intelligence is built on data that's collected about human beings. I think we all know the world is not always a fair place. The world is not always a safe place. I'll also add that the internet is not the world.
It's most
of the world is actually not reflected on the internet. And I appreciated your term, like the Californication of everything, because the internet is largely an English-speaking Western place. So the values, the methods of communication, they're very Westernized, right? Even the design decisions of saying most platforms are natively in English.
Yeah.
And no matter what part of the world you live in, you usually interact with social media
Correct.
platforms, search engines in English, even if you are typing the anglicized letters, the phonetics of your language, right?
Yeah.
My family is South Asian. We see this actually all over India,
Yeah.
Pakistan, Bangladesh. The way they communicate and talk, even over text, is they will type the phonetics of the word in Bengali, but in English characters. All these things matter, right? And they matter because all of that perspective, all of that way of doing things is put into these AI systems. So there's a couple of problems here. The first is that, as I mentioned, and as you've pointed out, the internet is not reflective of the world in its entirety, in its beauty, and its diversity, right? It's reflective of English-speaking Western perspectives, by and large. The second is that this data was not ever natively meant to build artificial intelligence. When you went on Facebook or Reddit or Twitter, did you think, oh, one day this is going to train an AI model?
Exactly.
Wow.
Yeah, that is going to be magnified
Right, that's going to be
rule the world.
Exactly.
Yeah.
No, so this data was never intended for that purpose. So that's second. And third is, just the abstraction from individual situations, interactions, scenarios that are sometimes historically old and outdated, to try to mash all of that together without context, without temporality, without understanding how the world itself has changed, just sort of flattens the diversity, right? The complexity of what it means to be human. So we're never going to have these AI models are parrots, right? They're mirrors. They're just reflecting the things that they're being fed without any context. So it makes it worse.
Oh, yes, that's actually really interesting. So you would take. I asked ChatGPT recently what my wife's name is, and it answered with so much confidence the wrong name. It's quite interesting, actually.
What most models do when you ask it about me, it generates a biography that is actually an amalgamation of multiple women in my field.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, so there are a few prominent women in AI ethics, responsible use, who have worked at companies, right? Google and Twitter and Microsoft, et cetera. So the biography that it writes about me is actually, I know how they've pieced together other people's bios to do this. So it'll say something like that I'm a professor at the University of Washington. That's not me. That's Emily Bender. That I worked at Google. That's not me. That was Meg Mitchell and Timney Gabriel. And just like, it pieces together the wrong story.
And it doesn't apologize.
No, I mean,
it doesn't say I'm not sure. I think it could be.
So I'm glad you raised that. So what I do with my nonprofit is I do these exercises called red teaming. And the purpose of red teaming traditionally has been to bring hackers to break into systems. I'm expanding the idea to say, when we're breaking a system here, it's not just about hackers causing malicious content. It could be exactly what you're talking about, an incorrect representation of a person, of a society, of a culture. So we did a red teaming exercise with scientists to look at COVID and climate mis and disinformation with language models. And I love these exercises because you see the technology through somebody else's eyes. Like, even if I am a quote outsider in tech, I'm very much of tech, right?
Yeah.
So I don't see things the way a scientist does. So what they told me was exactly what you said. What they said was, well, the fundamental problem with language models is that they speak very truthfully, right? So they speak as if what they say is the truth, when most of science is about inquiry, conversation, and discovery. So if you talk to scientists, they never say, well, that's the answer.
Yeah.
They'll always say, well, the research has this, and then there's this other research, and because science is understood as a language.
Yeah.
Language models don't impart science like that. They'll like try to say it like a fact. And it was interesting that scientists point out the same thing that you just said.
There is such an arrogance to it, to be quite honest. I mean, when I worked at Google, one of the things we took pride on in organizing the world's information, and I was one of the first people when I came into Google that tried to object and change that. And I was taught by Google that, for example, I remember there was a video on YouTube that said that Ataturk, the founder of the Turkish nation, is gay, right? And I basically said, but, Turks believe otherwise. Like, why are we showing this to Turkish people? And couldn't we just IP block it from Turkey and basically just avoid a conflict and, people being upset about it? And Google's view was, what gives you the right to say what's true and what's not, right?
That's right. I worry about that quite a bit. And this is why I said, is it so bad if we treat them like corporate entities? Because the dark side of believing in this mission is that ego. It's that belief that you know better than everybody else.
Correct.
And even, we see this even in the field of algorithmic bias when we think about bias and discrimination. My team at Twitter did research demonstrating that in 7 out of 8 Western democracies, the Twitter algorithmic feed versus chronological feed showed content that was more center-right. So people took it to say, oh my God, algorithmic bias, you need to fix it. And actually, that's a misinterpretation of our research. First is that we see the output. We don't actually see what caused it to happen. My working hypothesis is that what caused it to happen is the algorithms were working as expected. The purpose of social media algorithms is to give you content that is like the content that you are already engaging with.
Correct.
Our data was collected from April to August of 2020. Guess what most of the Western world was talking about at that time? Center-right politics. We had elections in Hungary, in Germany, in the United States, right? So the question actually is, to your point, who gives anybody the right to say what is political bias and not bias? Or to flip the question, what is a politically equitable output? Do we say 50-50, Democrats, Republicans? That's an arbitrary distinction.
Yeah, but if you really look at the wider spectrum of technology and you take Google search on one end and language models on the other end, Google search would tell you, look, you're looking for an answer. I have 1 million for you. Okay, million websites. Go look through them and find your own truth.
That's right.
I'm going to rank them in order of how many people are interested in each. But I don't know. I don't really know what you're interested in, and it's not the main driving factor, right? I have some context of where you are in the world, so I'm gonna, try to show you that. But I'll still give you a million. Versus language models that will say, I'm going to average the million and give you my
That's
point
right.
of view.
It's you raise a million, you just like hit the nail on the head. So last week was Google I/O.
Yeah, I watched it. Yeah.
Yes, but one of the things that they're basically saying is they're aiming to replace search with these sophisticated AI systems,
Yeah,
and
Gemini included in
exactly,
iSearch, yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
And we see the early days of it, right? So there's sort of AI. If you do any sort of a search on any sort of a search engine, you'll get some sort of AI generated output, for better or for worse. Now, you are absolutely correct. And if there's one thing I want your listeners to understand is that these language models are not information retrieval systems. A search algorithm is an information retrieval system. In other words, there's a pool of information and it's sticking its hand in, and there's a formula to how that information is pulled out, right? Social media algorithms, similar, right? There are tweets, there are posts, and your algorithm sticks its little hand in, shakes it around, and pulls out the 3 or 4 things that you're going to be interested in. Language models are information synthesis machines. What they do is they take that bucket of tweets or that bucket of websites and, to your point, mash it together. Again, and this is why it matters that they have no context. They have no temporality, right? It does not understand that maybe a fresher website is better, or a perspective is better than an older one, or that there's a difference between CNN and, some random guy's blog post or whatever, right? And I'm oversimplifying a lot of information integrity that goes into analyzing the data, but not enough. So information synthesis, the thing I worry about is it's telling people not to think for themselves. So to your point, the example you gave earlier is information retrieval would say, here's 100 websites. I have no idea, and I'm not going to try to understand what your intent is for doing the search, but I'll give you the tools to figure it out. It's like going to a library and picking your book instead of this large language model world, which is doing the thinking for you. Because right now your brain does the synthesis. They're saying, don't even bother with that. We'll do that for you.
And so what would your advice be for someone listening to this in this new world where you're being told by seemingly a superior intelligence what to believe?
Well, so first of all, it is certainly not a superior intelligence.
Oh, we disagree on that. There you go.
Well, okay. Insofar as we can debate the concept of the term intelligence.
Yeah, I want to do that, but let's stick to this question first. So what should people do in a world?
So first, and this is why I do these red teaming exercises, is just be critical of the information you are reading. It does not understand the context in which you want this information. It does not understand how that information fits into what you want to do with it, or how it even fits into the world as it is today. So just, be critical. We're seeing some more technical approaches like retrieval augmentation generation, RAG, which helps basically pull out the sources. And that's very helpful. And it's interesting because I taught for a long time, and, you always try to teach your students, don't use Wikipedia, look at the sources. And I feel like I'm saying the same thing all over again. Don't just use the output, try to understand the sources. Where is it coming from? So you still have to use your brain.
I believe that the biggest skill in the age of the rise of the machines is to actually debate, is to find out what the truth is. I worry technically that what is happening now is a very interesting downward spiral, because a lot of the content that's being put online as a source to teach the machine comes from the machine, right? So people are now, and as a matter of fact, some of it is even synthetic. It doesn't go through humans at all.
That's right.
So we're sort of, I don't know if you've ever seen the movie Idiocracy.
I have, yes.
Basically, it sums up what happens when we all start to believe in the same thing. That certain concepts are universally approved. Nobody's debating anything.
That's right.
And I think that's where we're heading in many ways.
I wish I had a more optimistic viewpoint, but we have seen cultural homogenization happen in multiple different ways. So on the panel I was on earlier today, our host was talking about, body dysmorphia.
Yeah.
Right. And Instagram face is a term that a lot of people are familiar with. If you're not familiar, we actually have an increasingly standardized concept of beauty when it comes to women.
Unbelievable.
And it is one look. It is
Yeah.
one specific, like the hairstyle. And I don't even need to explain to you what that look is for you to know what that look is.
Yeah.
So this cultural homogenization of what it means to be beautiful and it's so dull. It's so boring.
Yeah.
These are expressionless faces. And, there's a particular way they look. There's a particular vocal inflection. So interestingly, there's a particular vocal inflection to TikTok.
Oh, is that true?
Yes, because influencers, because they're constantly, quote, gaming the algorithm, they learn how to talk to engage people for longer. So there's a social engineering, but it is influence how you talk. We've seen, when people talk about attention spans decreasing, that is because we constantly consume these small bits of information.
Yeah.
We're seeing disturbing rates of young people who don't read books because they can't hold their concentration for an hour to read a book.
Correct.
Right. So, and then to your point of like this idea, so I think the next level of it is ideological homogenization. We all believe a thing. And I worry about that. I think that we should have a range of respectful perspectives, right? Like, I think the concept of, I'm very careful in my word choice here, because I think the concept of free speech has just been absolutely like ruined. It's destroyed. Like the free speech is not the freedom from consequence, to be clear. People seem to think it is. It's not. But I do worry that we cannot actually have healthy debates with each other. We cannot understand how to see other people's perspectives. We don't understand how to disagree politely. And we don't understand how to have fact-based reasoning because other machines are doing the reasoning for us.
That is such a spot on point. You see, the idea is that if we are unable to process, in whichever way, if we're unable to process the alternative opinion, the opposite opinion, we're going to seek to dampen that opinion. We don't even want to hear it. We don't want it to be as part of our, and I've been studying most of what's happening on social media is that we prejudge the content, the wisdom that's being shared by the person sharing it first.
That's right.
By the opinion of our friends of the person sharing it.
Yep.
By something else that this person said before, or simply by, is it in my, football club's interest or the opposite football? It's fanatic, basically.
That's
right.
Right.
If I'm on this side of the fence, then I will support killing children, whatever happens.
Right,
If I'm
right.
on that
'Cause
other
it's
side
my
of
in-group.
it's in my in-group, right?
Yes,
And
yes.
I think what, when you really start looking at the dumbing down of society to the
Right.
point that people are not able to make decisions for themselves.
Right.
And now you put that on steroids and give AI the right to take the view that you may want to hear and make you hear it over and over.
That's right.
Which reinforces your view.
Well, interestingly, that debate started in the United States with cable television.
Oh, is it?
Yes.
Yeah.
So cable television, traditional broadcast media has information standards. So if you look in the United States, if you're familiar with like CBS, NBC, ABC, those are broadcast. So when they say they're doing the news, it means something. There's actually like standards for what news is supposed to be. So cable introduced talking heads. So
Yeah.
now actually almost, and I actually really don't like this. I find it very hard to find information because everything now is mediated through a talking head. Someone's opinion, someone's perspective, right? And TikTok, I would say, is the embodiment of that. So it's beyond whether or not my group of friends think something. Now people will actively subscribe to people who will have a 3-minute perspective of what's happening in the world. And people are choosing that person based on a starting point of ideological alignment. So, in the United States, we'll use Fox News as the example. They use the word news. If they were not cable television, they could not use the word news because actually it is a series of news-like perspectives and ideologies, which is fine. That should be allowed to exist. But they have the veneer of it being objective information spreading. So I think we've lost that line between imparting information and giving information filtered through another perspective, whether it is a human version of it, and both sides suffer from this, right? Whether I listen to Jon Stewart, he does the same thing.
Yes, of
he is
course.
giving you a comedic perspective of what
subset
right,
of
what's
fact.
happening
Yeah.
in the world. But when you're laughing at the latest gaffe in Congress, realize that he made you laugh at it,
Yeah.
right? You did not independently hear what happened and say, oh my gosh, that person is an idiot. You believe that person's an idiot because Jon Stewart told you to believe he was an idiot, right? And now we're doing that with AI models. So now the AI models are going to synthesize the information, tell you how to think about a thing, even if it's imparted to you in a more objective sounding format.
That's worrying, Roman. That's
Very
worrying.
much so, very
I,
much so.
it,
But it's the road we have been on actually for many decades. So it almost feels not unfair. AI is the latest iteration of it.
Exactly. It's just as I always say, it's the steroids.
That's right. Yes.
It's the mirror. Beautiful, way of saying it. The way you say it. It's the mirror that's magnifying what we are as humans right now. So what should we do about this? What does your organization do? So Humane Intelligence. What are we attempting to do?
So there's two parts to what I do. I mentioned these red teaming exercises, and the red teaming is it's twofold. One is it is a way to bring in diverse perspectives, and I call it structured public feedback, methods of getting input from a wide range of people to the companies building these models to help improve these models. The second part of what it does is it ends up building a critical thinking reflex into consumer audiences. So it's one thing for you and me to sit here and say, oh, you should be smarter about how you use AI. But until that person sits down and tries to use AI on something that they are an expert at, and then they see where the problems are, then they actually feel like they have mastery of the tool. So human beings, we love breaking things. And in breaking things, we feel like, well, now I understand how to use it because I understood its upper limit. That's what red teaming can do. The second thing I'm working on is building this community of practice around algorithmic assessment and auditing. So there are laws passing all over the world to hold tech companies accountable, right? So in Europe, we have the Digital Services Act, which said something like, if you're a very large online platform, YouTube is an example, Facebook is an example, then you have to demonstrate to these regulators that your algorithms are not violating fundamental human rights, subverting free and fair elections, leading to mental illness and distress. I will tell you that having worked at a social media company, I could not tell you how to do that from a technical perspective.
Yeah.
So it's wonderful that we're passing these laws. Who are the people who have the skill sets to demonstrate whether or not Facebook is complying with this law? Because right now you have to go to Facebook and say, Facebook, are you complying with the law? And they will write up a report and they will give you their report. But who is this independent group of people who have the technical skill set to enforce all these laws that are being passed?
Yeah, I find that quite challenging, to be honest.
So the way we're starting with it is so a little bit of backstory. I came into the field of data science around like 2011, 2012. It was the early days of data science. The big Harvard Business Review, sexiest job of the 21st century. Everybody wanted to hire a data scientist. Nobody knew how. There was no degree programs. There was no skill set, but we had Kaggle. And Kaggle was really fascinating because Kaggle created online competitions that were designed around data science skill. And in doing so, there are two things. One is it set the standards and norms for what being a data scientist meant. What are the skills you had to have to be a good data scientist, right? It also set cultural best practices. And this was all unintentional, right? They set out to make these competitions. It also enabled people to demonstrate their skill in a very hands-on way. So it wasn't about getting a fancy degree. It was actually about, look, I understand how to do data inspection because I won the data inspection Kaggle competition. So I'm actually doing that for algorithmic assessment. I believe that, and this is just the root of all Silicon Valley, all tech. The most beautiful part about being in tech is that things are made from the community upwards. So you were joking about the bureaucrats. One of my concerns is that the bureaucrats don't get this. The bureaucrats don't get that top-down governance is not how technologists work. Engineers, technologists, we need to prove it for ourselves. So I'm building a series of online competitions around algorithmic assessment for the same reason that Kaggle needed to exist in the early days of data science.
That's a brilliant idea, to be honest. So you don't want Facebook to say I'm compliant. You want the analysis to say that they're not.
That's right. That's right. And just to maybe abstract it a bit, even just to introduce people to the idea that you can do this. The most interesting thing I have found from doing these challenges, and I've done a few, we did one at Twitter, actually. We did the first algorithmic bias bounty at Twitter. I found that there's an entire world of machine learning experts, AI experts, who did not realize that there are actual technical approaches to responsible use. They thought responsible use was like an ideology, that you had to have a belief. But that's not what I do. I'm like, you can actually build things. You
Yeah.
can solve a problem. And, engineers and data scientists, we like solving problems. So I give them a problem and they're like, wow, I never thought about tackling the problem that there could be an optimization function for an algorithm that's not just about quote performance, that I can optimize for a more equitable outcome. It's actually speaking the language of a technologist in order to have a better social outcome.
Complex world. I remember vividly the first time I realized how complex our world was becoming was when the engineering team introduced me to Ad Exchange. I don't know if you remember the product within Google at the same time. So this was Google's way of having machines talk to machines to place advertisements online.
Okay.
And it was fascinating. And I think I was maybe 48 at the time. And I was like, oh, I'm getting old. Like, this is really complex. But let's quickly jump into some of the areas where we slightly see it differently. We disagree. When I used superior intelligence around artificial intelligence, I basically meant superior in whichever task we give them, right? So take something like a recommendation engine on a social media platform. It's definitely more intelligent at influencing and manipulating people, which sadly is the task we give them, than any person I know, especially at the scale at which they operate. I do not know of a single human that can manipulate 4 billion people a day, right? So there is superiority in this. And in looking at the way and the rate and the pace at which they progress, you start from this point of giving them one task and they become superior at it, and then multiple tasks and then multiple entities of them. We're bound to be in a place where we will lose in the intelligence competition on every front sooner or later.
Okay, yeah. So here's where we disagree on that. So, okay, there are many steps that went into the scenario that you're talking about. One is defining an optimization function, which you mentioned, right? So it's persuasion or manipulation. And it's almost like cheating because the rules of the game have been constructed to be good at the things AI is good at, which is processing a massive amount of information and, doing it at scale. You're right. Human beings are terrible at that. But did that mean that Deep Blue was more intelligent than Gary Kasparov? No, it was a basic tree-based model. It was a tree-based retrieval system. So Deep Blue is a very, very simple system in today's understanding of AI.
And I met Gary Kasparov, and he's very intelligent.
He's very intelligent, and also he's an outspoken.
Yeah.
He's very outspoken about artificial intelligence. So I've met him in some of those contexts as well. But I say that to point out that, in a sense, of course, Deep Blue was going to beat Gary Kasparov because chess is a game of probability.
Correct.
So the construct, the rules of the game were that if you were good at calculating probabilities very quickly and imagining every
tree.
Potential scenario, you were going to win.
Yeah.
Yes, of course. Which is why, Go, AlphaGo, and Lee Sedol was a more interesting.
I was just going to say, but that's very different than Go.
It is different from Go.
Yeah.
But it is interesting. So if we create the rules of the game to be, well, if you're good at collecting a lot of data and processing it and implementing it at scale, then you're going to be, quote, more intelligent. Sure. Yes, we've lost. But is that what intelligence is?
What is intelligence?
So that is the thing that I'm incredibly interested in. And I'm working on a podcast and possibly a book that I'm now tentatively calling The Meaning of Life.
Oh.
Well, and it's a little bit tongue in cheek, right? Because we use this word intelligence and we actually often equate it with sentience, which is why everyone talks about AGI.
Another part we slightly disagree on. Keep going.
Well, but also I'll preface it by saying that we don't have scientific consensus of what intelligence is. So if we take this away from technology right now and we say, how do we decide if an animal is intelligent? How do we decide if insects are intelligent? How do we decide if plants are intelligent? There are entire fields of study actually that do this, right? And maybe people are familiar with thinking about whales or dolphins, et cetera. But all of those analogs are scientific constructs that people have spent a lot of time thinking through. And there are some common themes. One is actually pain avoidance. It's actually a pretty common theme of trying to identify if a being is intelligent. So just to clarify, the ability to just perform tasks is not necessarily intelligence. Intelligence is a little bit of higher level thinking. Last year, there was a bit of controversy in the insect community because this one researcher was saying actually bees are sentient. because they experience emotions like jealousy. So I think it's interesting because what you start to arrive at is, in a sense, intelligence is irrationality because you are doing things that are not necessarily the most data logical thing to do, which
Yeah.
is why Go was fascinating because there is one particular move in the
Move
iteration of
37.
moves.
Yeah.
Yes, move 37, where it was doing something that seemed illogical. So I thought that was very fascinating. But no, I don't. And again, just to like beat the point to death a little bit, intelligence is not a defined construct. Defining intelligence as simply the performance of intellectual tasks is quite limiting. It's also, problematic. So OpenAI, and if you ask ChatGPT, it'll tell you this, defines intelligence as the automation of all tasks of economic value. Now, once you've done that, raising children does not require intelligence.
And that doesn't bring economic value not
no,
for
it
a very long
doesn't.
time unless you believe in child labor. But
Right,
yeah.
right. Taking care of your elderly parents
Yeah.
is the opposite of intelligence because they're a diminishing marginal good. You should just let them die.
But once again, I think that's because of the Californication of
It's because of the corporatization of it.
maybe, yeah. I
Right.
mean, it's the even masculization of like
That
IQ.
that's
IQ is
right.
the only
That's
only
right.
form of intelligence,
let's
or
take it a-
process is the only form of usable output.
That's right. Or let's take it even a step deeper than that and say GDP. So GDP was specifically designed to minimize the labor of women, right? This is why we don't have a value placed on having a good home and raising children because those were feminized tasks and those were not considered to be of quote societal or economic value.
Interesting.
When now we actually know that those are probably the tasks of the most societal and economic value because you don't have a productive society. And frankly, I worry we're reaching a world in which we define ourselves so entirely by our professions that
Yeah.
we forget that we're supposed to be humans.
Yeah, by profession, by income, by net worth.
That's right. So my problem with even just the term artificial intelligence, the term artificial general intelligence, is it misses that intelligence is a social construct. We have used intelligence to exclude people. So some of the justifications for slavery have been, oh, well, they're more like animals. They're not intelligent. So it's fine to enslave them because they don't have the intelligence that we do. Some of the reasons for excluding women from jobs or higher education would be, and it's always in a very patronizing way. Oh, your brain, like quote, scientific, like eugenics is the science of exclusion, right? It's a science, quote, a pseudoscientific way of trying to prove that some people are less intelligent and it's some biological structure. But we know this to not be true.
So I totally agree, by the way. I think one of my biggest battles have been to try and show the world, because it was my own personal experience as I started to sort of more empower my feminine side and drop the Middle Eastern masculine, highly, driven executive type of belief system to try and tell the world there is IQ. Yeah, right. But then there is EQ, there is intuition, there is,
That's right.
compassion, there is empathy, there is paradoxical thinking, all feminine in their nature and much more intelligent, as a matter of fact, if you take intuition or creativity, right? Creativity is a form of intelligence that happens to be the opposite of the discipline that the hyper-masculine world wants, right? And it's quite interesting that most of the things that we actually have in our world are driven from there, believe
That's
it or
right.
not,
That's right.
at its primacy. The challenge, I think, with AI is that we've just been building IQ so far. I mean,
right.
linguistic intelligence of language models is just
Right.
IQ. It's just take a lot of information and
That's right.
crunch it into a small amount of.
It is the new version of Deep Blue, right?
Yeah.
We were just talking about Deep Blue as this. It's an impressive probabilistic system. Yeah, that's exactly what AI is good for. Great, and actually, I would say we should do that, right? So the dream that's sold to us is that AI will automate all of these boring tasks, and we will have a lot of leisure time to do things. So that's wildly not true, and has nothing to do with technology. It has to do with our
capitalist approach
That's
to
right.
life. Yeah.
That's exactly
I
it.
mean, that's the same promise of the mobile phone.
That's
like,
right.
we're going to give you a mobile phone so that you can do your tasks from the beach and,
Right.
enjoy life. But the truth
instead
is...
you just do work on vacation.
Exactly, yeah.
You don't go on vacation anymore. Well, interestingly, this was a conversation in the first industrial revolution. There were all these books about how people will work only 4 hours a week and will have all this leisure time to pursue art and music and poetry. And if anything, we work more.
Yeah.
We work more. There's like, and I don't do this work, but I've certainly seen some research into how medieval peasants worked less than we do.
Truth. Yeah, and I think the idea is that, of course, you leave some productivity on the table. The productivity junkies go like, I can create more shareholder value with that.
Right.
And, why should I give my employee 4 hours a day free when I'm paying them anyway?
Right. Well, and the other thing is it's so ingrained into Silicon Valley culture. We think about this
Correct.
idea of hacks,
Yeah.
body hacks, right? So anything that we do, literally biological functions are inefficient because, and we quote, have sleep hacks,
Yeah.
eating hacks. So people do all these like supplements and they'll drink Soylent because eating is inefficient. Like we can't be eating. My God, you could be programming. Why are you eating? Why you're going to sleep more efficiently? Sleep hacks. You only need to get 4 hours of sleep a night because you got to wake up, like rise and grind, right? And that's the culture. So how are we going to enable? So I guess maybe to full circle to how we started the podcast, we have these beautiful visions sold about what technology will do for us. And I truly want to believe that that's what we're going to achieve. But we don't get there with Silicon Valley because so much of that culture is based on this idea of productivity above all. So I think it is a culture and a community that is very uncomfortable with some of the things you've mentioned: creativity, boredom, right? Just
Yeah.
abstract thoughts. Like you're not, everything needs to be like product. You can't have a hobby. You have to figure out how to make your hobby monetizable,
Yeah.
right? That can't be the world that creates human flourishing.
You're a fascinating being. Oh my God. We need this podcast to be 7 hours, I think.
That would be so much fun. As long as I have a lot more of the Arabic coffee to drink.
Oh, yes.
That would be great.
Did you like the Arabic coffee?
I love it. I'm drinking
It's
too much
crazy,
of it.
right?
It's so good.
It's-
It's simultaneously mild, but very energizing.
But it is quite caffeinated.
It
you know
is.
that.
It
It's
is.
like
I mean, that's why they give you.
tiny bits of it. I'm really grateful that you joined me today, Rumman. This was a wonderful conversation.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. And for all of you listening, I actually wanted to leave you on this anticipating point. Yeah, the answer might actually be just to slow down. Honestly, a world that is constantly advancing so fast. I'd probably say, as I said, when I watched Google present Ad Exchange for the first time, faster than my pace of comprehending all of this. And the only control we have actually is to control our own behavior in this world, to become more skeptical of the information that's presented to us, to become more jealous about our own time and freedom, to become more interested in the other forms of intelligence that really make us human, the feminine side of intelligence, as I always call it, the intuition, the empathy, the paradoxical thinking, the creativity, the playfulness, the flow. All of those are forms of intelligence that are not going to be part of the machine, at least not yet. And I think the most important of them is the ability to create human connections. I'm very grateful today that I created this connection. I ask you to create more connections in the world of the rise of artificial intelligence. I ask you to find a little bit of time to connect with your own self, because it doesn't matter how busy you are today. There's always a tiny bit of time to slow down. I love you all for listening, and I will see you next time.